She was a Birmingham-based female photographer working in the 50s and 60s. She was also an academic, and she spent a lot of time documenting the changing city during that time.
Phyllis is a bit of an enigma. She was born in 1909 in Aston to Amelia and Charles Nicklin. Her father died in 1920, and then there's little known about her. She was a graduate and a postgraduate of Birmingham University. She taught at Nottingham University during the war. She then came back to Birmingham after the war and trained as a teacher before taking a position as a staff tutor in the extramural department of the geography department of Birmingham University. And she died in 1969.
In terms of the quality of her work, I can't see that she just picked up a camera and was able to compose and frame stuff the way she does. To me, having gone through the process of learning how to be a photographer and being essentially self-taught, that doesn't happen overnight, not for anyone. I feel like she's probably put a lot of time and effort into her methodology and her composition and working out how to frame the city in the way that she wants to.
And so she managed to capture, a fantastic, archive of material. And what she's managed to do is really sort of capture that period with her photographs, which makes it much easier to understand that story and also to tell that story. The images are very powerful in terms of capturing the sort of the dramatic impact that urban redevelopment had on the city at that particular time.
Although Birmingham is a city which has got change written through its DNA, that particular period, the post-war period, 50s and 60s, was a time of accelerated change in Birmingham, and now we are living through another time of accelerated change. Ironically, some of the very things that she was documenting as new projects, for instance the Central Library and so on, are now, through the window behind me, being demolished in exactly the same kind of clean slate approach to development that has often characterised Birmingham's history.
These images are an important find, but I think in 30 to 40 years' time, in the throwaway society we live in now, where everyone's just taking images on camera phones and iPads, I think we'll struggle to find good images of the library being locked down in 40 years' time. They'll have just disappeared.
I think it's scary that we could potentially lose an entire generation's worth of images. And yes, maybe 80% of them are someone's dinner, but it's still a document, and I think it does make me sad that you won't be able to rummage in a garage and find a whole bunch of negatives or a whole bunch of slides that lead you on this fairy tale journey into someone's life that's passed. If someone was to say that she was just a lecturer who took photos, I would argue that actually she was both. I don't think one negates the other. I think this idea that her work is just applied or documenting is possibly some of the prejudice creeping in from certain sections of the photographic community. And I can only really talk from my own personal experience. Being a female photographer, if I initially meet people and we talk about what I do, they immediately assume I'm a wedding photographer or a portrait photographer. Certainly feel like there's work to be done, and I certainly feel that there's been times where I've been frustrated by being a female in this field, but I imagine for Nicklin especially it was a lot harder and a lot more difficult, and things have come a long way since the 1950s and 60s. Her body of work, her passion about it, the way she's documented the city, it speaks for itself. It argues that she is a photographer rather than just a lecturer who took photos for her teaching purposes.
That period was particularly interesting. Birmingham always does things in a very bold fashion, and certainly the comprehensive redevelopment that was being undertaken at that particular time was a good example of that. It was the largest comprehensive redevelopment scheme in the country at that particular time. 5 comprehensive redevelopment areas were designated, and Birmingham embarked on a radical transformation of that inner part of the city. where it decided to sort of do away with the legacy of the slum housing that still existed in the city, but created and fashioned a completely new image for the city, very much driven by sort of very modernist thinking in terms of creating high-rise housing estates right around the centre of the city.
And here we are seeing the city going through immense change again, and the similarities between change then and change now are virtually the same. Different type, different era, but very, very similar in the way development's approached and the way new schemes are brought forward.
And many of those images are of quite ordinary things, but I think they tell a very powerful story in terms of what was going on in terms of the redevelopment of the city at that particular time. So, she will leave a very important sort of legacy, I think, to those of us who are interested in the planning and the development of the city.
I really like the image of Fred's cabin because it is normal life. It's nothing spectacular. It is a board showing how much egg and chips, bacon sandwiches were in the 1960s. The signage is amazing. The colour on the signage is great. It just really stands out.
My favourite image in the exhibition is the one of Colmore Row, which I suppose isn't surprising given that I work for Colmore Business District, but it's the one that's outside the National Westminster Bank, which is now, of course, the location of the NatWest Tower, which is in the process itself of being taken down. I partly like that image because I'm quite keen on old cars, and it's got a huge selection of lovely 1950s cars parked in the street, and includes a motorcyclist sidecar, I think, from memory. You can actually see the National Westminster Bank building there, which will then be replaced by a 23-storey tower, which is now going to be replaced by another glass tower. So it actually epitomises the spirit of change that Phyllis was documenting.
I think there's lots about Phyllis's work that's exciting, not just the aspect of change. I think that some of her most engaging images are the ones that include people. For now, like back in the time, what might be more interesting is her more urban work, and when we're looking back 50 years later, you've got sort of engaging images of parts of the city that weren't quite as affluent as other parts.
I also like the images that contain people in them, because it provides a bit of scale to the image, but also it tells the human story. And there's, one image I can remember where there's this little boy in the foreground, and you can see sort of the redevelopment that's gone on in the background, which really brings it home that, the comprehensive redevelopment has an impact on people. It's not just about the physical fabric of the city that's changing, it's the people who live within that fabric that are very much impacted by that change. And I think she captures that, admirably.
Lincoln Tower on Gilby Road. I particularly like it because it captures a sense of hope and a brave new world. You've got the shiny new tower blocks that were meeting a severe housing crisis and providing homes for people, and in the background we've got what are in effect slums, properties not fit for habitation that need to be cleared, and in the middle of the photograph you've got a couple of people sort of walking up a sort of brand new road and new pavement, and it just captures that sort of feeling of the brave new world.
The tumultuous changes that Phyllis Nicklin was documenting in the 50s and 60s do have some parallels with the tumultuous changes that are going on now, but they also have some significant differences. Back then, a lot of the change has been driven by social revolution, new attitudes towards urbanism and housing and so on, and also the fact that the city was perceived as being held back by a lack of infrastructure, particularly transport infrastructure. So, and a need to bring the city into a period that was being recognised as modernism at the time.
I think her work captures, in essence, the significant change. It almost captures hope an aspiration. The composition of her photographs is incredible, but it really does sort of translate that movement from what was the removal of the 1920s, 30s sort of and bomb sites of the city, moving into the brave new world of the city, emerging in the late 1960s that led into the 70s. So she absolutely captured that very much sort of through the lens.
The images are very powerful in terms of capturing the sort of the dramatic impact that urban redevelopment had on the city at that particular time. And it's something you can't capture in words. It's sort of something that she visually displays incredibly well in terms of helping us to sort of get to grips with the understanding of not only the evolution of planning, but also the evolution of the city itself.
When Pete James, who was then working for Library of Birmingham, approached us about a year ago, asked us if we were interested, then obviously we jumped at the chance. I'd never heard of Phyllis Nicklin's work at the time, so I had a look at it and also showed it to board members and working group members at the bid. They thought it was a great idea. It was just absolutely right, the kind of thing we were looking for, particularly at this particular time. The success of the exhibition is difficult to measure in absolute objective terms, but certainly in terms of column inches and hits on websites and so on, yes, it's been great. It's been very successful. Social media impact, massive. For me, the most evident demonstration of its success is to go and stand in the square for a while and actually see people looking at the exhibition, making phone calls to friends and relatives and telling them that they must come and see this exhibition and how great it is. I think for any photographic or art exhibition to be able to achieve that kind of impact with people is quite something.
I think all of this is a byproduct of getting to know the city, and I don't know what her intentions were when she was shooting or why she was shooting these amazing scenes, but the reason I went out and started shooting Birmingham was because I wanted to get to know it well.
I mean, from looking around at all the pictures, it's just nice to know what's still up from back in the 60s when she's documented it all, and it's nice to know what was up that's now down. It's just quite interesting actually, because I'm looking at, oh really, they kept that building and they dropped that building, so it's quite nice to look at our old heritage and how it's all changing and all the climate's changing. So.
There are places of familiarity to all of us, whether they be iconic buildings in the city centre or parts of the ring road or parts of residential areas. So you just start having conversations with people in front of them about, the familiar and the unfamiliar, really.